Forgiveness, in a sense, could be seen as digesting a tragedy, a painful experience. That in order to forgive something, it has to come in, it has to make its way through, and it has to be released. In that sense, the absence of forgiveness is a form of constipation. I can't accept it, and so I cannot release it. I can't accept it, so I can't change it. A lack of forgiveness, in a very concrete sense, is an inability to process a certain pattern of energy at a certain density or mass. And this makes sense. We have a mouth, we have a stomach that is capable of eating one salad, maybe two salads, maybe 3 or 4 salads. But can this stomach digest 1,000 salads? Can this stomach fit 1,000 salads? And the answer is no. It doesn't matter if it's chocolate cake or salad or arsenic or anything else. There is a volume of energy that one human identity, that one human body cannot digest. There are also certain forms of energy that this body cannot digest. Now, there's a flexibility, there's a continuum. Certain people can digest more of one thing than another. You might let 100 people get struck by lightning, and some survive, and some are permanently disabled, and some are killed by the pattern of energy and the intensity. Those that can let it flow through are, of course, the least affected. And it's one of the reasons I was out in my teens on a 92-foot staysail schooner in the Canadian North, and there was a lightning storm, and it would hit the steel beam, the steel mast, go down the rigging and into the water. And the entire rigging and the ladder that I used to climb up to the crow's nest were glittering with electricity. It's literally sparking off the handles. And I had no idea, never having been exposed to such high voltage as seeing sparks come off, if I would die by touching and climbing down from the crow's nest. But it turns out it's grounded by the water. In other words, the electricity is not demanding that I digest it, but that something digest it. And an ocean is big enough to absorb all of that energy, to perhaps be nourished by it. If you think of something like an ionic breeze, an air purifier through that electrical chemistry. That the smell of the air after a lightning strike, after lightning is in the environment. You could say that as long as the digestive organism of energy is big enough, then all energy is nutritious. All energy is nutrients when paired with the right ecology. So what could be fatal to my body if ungrounded in nature can become nutritious to the ecology of life on Earth, that there's a role that lightning plays in that ecology. And the Earth can absorb that lightning and even be enlivened by it. Similarly, a slap in the face can be a wake-up call, or it can precipitate the collapse of an identity. A fragile identity that's built upon the pomposity of being unable to make mistakes, i.e., I have legitimacy because I never make mistake, a papal pomposity. You know, the Pope is always right. The Pope can't make a mistake. Well, that crumbles as soon as you show one mistake. The Pope said he ordered eggs Benedict, but he gets sausages and a tape is replayed. And he said sausages instead of eggs Benedict, and he made a mistake. Well, this has to be hushed up to maintain the fragility of identity. A single body cannot accept 30,000 volts if there's nowhere for the energy to pass through. Now, when the grief of 20,000 people, 20,000 people exterminated in a nuclear blast, when the grief of 20,000 people is given to one witness, is it too much to bear? Is it too much to digest? Does that move into a horror and a trauma that is so dissociative that one cannot accept the charge, cannot digest the charge, cannot release the charge? Does rape of a 5-year-old, of a 3-year-old, the size, the mass, the smell, the violation, is that too much for a 5-year-old to digest? Can they process? Can they come back into their body and feel the moment of dissociative overwhelm? Because if it is too much to feel, if it is too much to digest and take in, it is too much to let go of. Letting go happens on the other side of acceptance and letting in and processing and digesting, and then it can come out. If you try and eat a steel shovel, is it too much to let in? Now the rust, the iron from a steel shovel, a little bit of powdered rust may add trace minerals to the diet, but a chunk of steel will foul the system. If you can get it down the throat, it cannot pass through. It's too sharp, it's too dense, it's too big, and the attempt to digest it leads to death. So there are unforgivable things that we cannot accept, because to do so is to break the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being of the witness, of the one who encounters that pattern of energy. There are things we cannot forgive because there are things we cannot accept. And the reason we cannot accept them is we cannot digest them. Now, that's not to say that no one at any stage of development could not accept that pattern of energy at that intensity. It is to say that we, as we are constituted, cannot handle that energy. It's not to say the energy cannot be handled. There are volcanoes into which blocks of steel 1,000 times bigger than what we could digest could be thrown in. And those steel blocks would melt. Gases would be released. And something would be done. And upon being spewed out or burnt up, those minerals in the air or in the soil would be digested, would be transformed, chelated into dye, into iron, into rust, and permeate the soil and be digested over the next 10 million years. The earth has time, more time than this fragile identity that's just got 100 years. 100 years to digest things physically, psychologically, on all the many dimensions, sensorily and otherwise. We've got 100 years. The Earth has 20 billion years and counting. The universe can digest anything the universe produces over the next trillion years. The universe has an endless amount of time to digest all things. The universe, as far as we know, is getting bigger, and so has an endless amount of size to digest all things. But we do not. There are things we cannot accept. There are things we cannot digest. There are things we therefore cannot let go of. And these are unforgivable in the most technical sense of the word. So, what do we do with something we've been given that's too big to feel, that's too big to understand, that's too big to digest? What do we do with those patterns of energy? With a helplessness that ruptures the psyche, that shatters the identity, and was caused knowingly by another human being, by one's own government. Our government took the tax money under threat of imprisonment and seizure and potentially death. You will pay us this amount of your wages, or else we will seize everything you own. We will imprison you. We may take your life. We will destroy your family unless you give this to us. Why? For your own good, of course, so that we can help you. And when you get caught in a covert CIA operation, when you're sent to war on the basis of lies and corruption and bribery, when your own tax dollars seized forcefully or under the threat of force are used to jeopardize the ecology. How many Priuses does it take to recover from burning a country alive? Men, women, children, and forests set alight by napalm on the basis of a lie. on the basis that this would make us more secure to kill so many of our own and other people, to burn a forest alive, that this was necessary for our security, that we had to respond, that we were attacked halfway around the world. What do you do when your family is in ruins? Because energy seized with the threat of death, with the threat of imprisonment, was used to harm rather than to help. And you had no father as a young boy. And you had no rite of initiation. And you had no psychological training. And you had no emotional literacy, no relational literacy, no traumatic literacy. And you got plowed with one energy after another by the cult of your culture. And it is too heavy to carry. What do you do when the energy is too big to digest? What do you do with those red-hot lumps of steel that are too hot to hold? Where do you throw them? Who can handle that heat? This is the unforgivable. I cannot face it and maintain my integrity. It's too big. It's too crushing. It's too mind-numbing to stay awake, to stay present, and retain some sense of self. Now, if one can digest the energy, it is like a bowel movement, a sense of peace and release. My dog is never happier than when he passes food through his body. As soon as he's finished a bowel movement, capering about, jumping around, he's so excited because he succeeded. He took energy in. His stomach went at it with enzymes. He added liquid. He took time. He extracted nutrients. And then he pushed out the remains. His body is lighter. He's nourished by the experience of passing it through. So it is the most selfish thing you can possibly do to forgive and release that which you are capable of forgiving and releasing. And one could say it is one of the best things for those who caused the suffering as well. You know, there's an interesting irony. The unforgiven person has a curse, has a barrier, has a taboo associated with them, has a certain kind of prison, even if it's the prison of, you're not welcome here, I will not acknowledge you, I will not accept you, I will not see who you are. Every prisoner, and in the United States, roughly 1% of the population is going through the criminal justice system. Every prisoner, 1 in 100 people, consumes vast amounts of public money to put them in a concrete box. You'd have to wonder, who are you imprisoning? the economy of the future generations, the ecology. It harms the ecology to build those concrete boxes. It harms the ecology to truckload after truckload of food and waste in and out of a prison block. But the prisoners come and serve, for the most part, their term. 3 years, 5 years, 20 years. But a career warden is in prison for life. Not only does the public have to pay $10 million in many cases to punish, to arrest, to house, to imprison a long-term inmate. $100,000 a year. $10 million, the trial, the institution, the whole system. But a warden has to stand at the gate in prison and make sure that they don't get out. It takes energy. It taxes a system to imprison someone. A thief stole $3 of candy. They must be punished. How? Well, why don't we put them in jail for 3 years at a cost of $300,000 so that the theft of $3 can be amplified 100,000 times? By stealing under threat of seizure, you must pay these taxes because we need to lock up these people. So now, rather than just robbing $3 from the free market, we're now robbing $300,000 to punish the inmate. Now let's shift gears a little bit and look at another conundrum around forgiveness. All things are interconnected. All things are interconnected. I'm not talking metaphysically, I'm talking scientifically. A scientist can connect this finger on multiple dimensions to any celestial body seen by any telescope. Let's take the dimension of gravity. This finger is co-created with the gravitational constant. Now, the gravitational constant includes shifts in gravity based on mass. So for a planet our size with our density, we have our level of gravity. But there are different masses and densities throughout the known universe. And while gravity in its exact formulation will change based on the density and mass of a given object, how much it changes is constant. There's a gravitational constant that connects this finger and every star in the universe. That's just one of 1,000 different threads that connects this finger to every other thing. And this is part of the wrestling point with forgiveness. Because if I say, I cannot accept, I reject child molestation. No, that is bad, that is evil, that is unforgivable. So that may well be true. for you. You watched your sister, you watched your little brother, you watched your best friend, and you couldn't face it at 6 years old. And because you couldn't face it at 6 years old, that part of you that couldn't face that part of reality didn't grow up. It shut down. I can't face what's here. I've got to look away. But in the looking away, there's also a seizure. There's an arresting of development. You see, and that's connected. Many times, if I cannot accept something that happened, then I cannot accept myself in my response of what happened. Meaning, the equation that says that person is bad, that person is evil, they are unforgivable, is often the equation that says I'm not good enough, i.e. I am bad and unforgivable because I couldn't stop it. In other words, wherever the nucleus of the situation resides, that which surrounds the situation is complicit, is connected, and the unacceptability radiates out. Generally speaking, if I cannot accept my parent for doing this, and this, and the other, to a fucking 3-year-old, if I cannot accept my parent, the default mode, the default mathematics of association says I cannot accept myself at 3 years old for not being able to defend myself. It's not a rational decision. It's a mathematical decision. If I could not be present for the event, then I could not be present for myself, not being present for the event. If I cast the one out, I'm often dissociating from the other. I cannot forgive and digest and integrate what I dissociate from. I cannot associate with what is too big to digest. It's too big to digest. I must dissociate. And I can't forgive the me that experienced the pain or the one who caused the pain because they're too closely linked. In order to forgive the one that experienced the trauma, I have to associate with the one who experienced the trauma. In order to associate with the one who experienced the trauma, I've got to feel what the one who experienced the trauma could not and would not feel. Because it isn't trauma if you can feel it and digest it. If you can understand it. I lost a finger. It's going to happen. Dad was in a bad mood. People get in a bad mood. Accidents happen. But I can deal with that. Dad was in a bad mood. I happened to be in the way. Machines are built like this. I lost a finger. I can no longer play baseball, but I can do this. I can't do this, but I can do this. And there is a digestion. I accept myself. I can deal with it. And because I can deal with myself without dissociating, without freezing in a moment of time, because I can deal with myself, I can deal with Dad. And I can confront my mortality. One of these accidents, one of these days, by someone, could kill me. I could be in the crossfire. I could be hit by a car. Brake pads could fail. It's possible. And I can face that. I can digest and release that, and I can therefore be in the moment. And this is the other important part of the equation. When you are moving through time, and there is a block of energy at a density that cannot be accepted and thus moved beyond, it's like a roadblock. Stick is laying in the road, it's this thick, bum, 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 bum. The car is over the roadblock. Teddy bear falls out of the car in front, bum, 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 bum. The car is over the teddy bear, the bumps are there. 3-foot tree falls down in front of the car, head-on collision into the 3-foot diameter tree. Car is totaled. The tree is not moving, and it does not move because the car collided with it. It's too big. The journey comes to a halt. You've still got 300 miles to go, but you're not moving in that vehicle. And this is what trauma is about. The vehicle is the identity. The identity is the habit, the pattern. My pattern. My habit. Of what? Of thinking. How do I know it's me? Because I thought these thoughts before and I still think them today. That's me. Those are my thoughts. How do I know they're mine? Because I think them regularly. There's continuity. There's a pattern. It's not like yesterday I was a libertarian, an hour later I was a Republican, an hour later I was a Democrat, an hour later I was a Nazi. That's called schizophrenia. You don't know who you are because you're changing incoherently. There's no me. Who are you? Are you this? Are you that? Do you like me? Do you hate me? Make up your mind. Who are you? No, you know who you are because there's a pattern. A pattern of thinking. My dad was a Republican. I'm a Republican. I was a Republican yesterday. I'm a Republican today. I'm a Republican tomorrow. My dad was a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. I was a Democrat yesterday. I'm a Democrat today. And I will recognize myself, recognize, remember, re-put together who I am tomorrow. Who am I? Oh, yes, I am a Democrat. There's continuity in the pattern. That was my car yesterday. It was my car when I bought it. It's been my car the last 3 years. And boom, the car is totaled. It's unrecognizable. It's dysfunctional. I'm going nowhere on this 300 journey in that car. If I want to continue my journey, assuming I am conscious and do not need to be hospitalized, which is assuming I'm alive, I have to get out of the car. I have to assess the damage. I have to accept this car is not going to take me the next 300 miles. I wanted it to. I planned on that identity, that habit, that pattern of thinking, of feeling, of speaking, of doing, and of being. That was me. And it hit a mass. It hit a tree. And it's shattered the pattern. I don't know who I am. I'm in shock. I'm in dissociative shock. This pattern is not going to work anymore. I need a pattern. That one's totaled. If I want to continue the journey, I have to formulate a new pattern. I need a new identity. I need a new vehicle to get going the next 300 miles. Now, if I can get out of the car and climb over the 3-foot tree and locate a vehicle, there's my credit card. Can I call a taxi, an Uber? Can I call a friend to locate a vehicle, a new pattern? A new pattern of energy that can transport me where I want to go. So, an identity is a vehicle. It's a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that has certain limitations and certain possibilities associated with it. And if I can use those resources, tires are a bit raggedy, the fender's bent, but I can get the next 100, next 200, next 300 miles of my journey. Maybe I just get to the next 100 in that vehicle. Then I find a better vehicle. I learn, I repair it, I invest in it, I refuel. I formulate a new identity. The old identity is still stuck at the tree. And the question is, what happens when you can't get out of the car? The car is totaled. The engine's stalled. There's a tree across the road. Maybe it was an act of God, maybe an act of nature, maybe a sadistic neighbor felled the tree just as we were coming. You're not getting through in that car. What happens when your legs are broken? What happens when the ambulance doesn't come? What happens when you're stuck at mile number 3? There's 300 miles ahead, but you can't get out of the car. You're psychologically illiterate. You don't understand that just because the you that you've known, the old pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is shattered. You can form a new one. Just because the red Pontiac is totaled doesn't mean you couldn't buy a Subaru, at least to get you the next 100 miles, or hire a taxi, or call a friend, to ride a while in their identity and their habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing to get to the next milestone. But if you cannot accept what has happened, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I'm shattered. What am I going to do? This identity that I am cannot get over this tree. I do not have the money to repair this car. I'm stuck. I can drink. I can shoot up. I can ruminate. I can rage. I can pound my fist. But I can't get out of the car. I can't get into a new vehicle. I'm stuck there. And part of me stays stuck until there's help. It's the nature of trauma. Trauma is a pattern of energy that is so big, it shatters the identity. It shakes and shatters the reality of that produced that identity. I was cocky, I was confident. in a reality of endless trust fund wealth. My credit card was wanted everywhere. My business was wanted everywhere. And then the market crashed. There was a margin call. And the reality that produced that habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing shatters. And how can I be cocky when people avert their eyes and remind me of my unpaid debts? The identity of invincibility in a reality of being ruined, it doesn't go together. But I'm not prepared in a psychologically illiterate cult to go from this identity to its polar opposite with no technology or training on how to transition from one pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being to another. When I think that that's me, this is me. I don't know who I am. Who will I be if I'm not me? And who is me except my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? Where will I find myself? There is a catastrophe when one identifies with one's car and the car is totaled. How does one get into a new car when one has never differentiated oneself from one's vehicle? Because most of us, from the time we've had language, have never witnessed in a materialist cult the distinction between the witness and the habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. We've never differentiated one from the other. We've never known a part of ourself to exist outside of the vehicle we reside in. And so when the vehicle is totaled, we are totaled. And when we cannot repair the vehicle from within the totaled vehicle, we are finished. We are stuck. We are arrested in our development. We are stopped and stuck at a certain stage of the journey. And 10 years can go by and the tree doesn't move and the car does not come back to life. And the 300-mile destination becomes more and more hopeless because we don't know how to get out of the car, because others don't know how to help us out of the car, because we don't know how to transition between lifetimes, between identities, between roles, between vehicles. And the terror of the unknown in a highly traumatized cult is so overwhelming. In a highly traumatized culture, the terror of the unknown, of letting go of an identity to become a new identity, is so stultifyingly, overwhelmingly, numbingly frightening that we will not leave the car behind. The abused child in a traumatized cult clings to the parent that abuses them as a foster parent, as a therapist tries to bring them into a new setting where a new identity can form, when all you've known is pain and out of control suffering. The fear of change, the devil you don't know, the angel you don't know, is more traumatic, more terrifying than the devil, than the abuser that you know. Because to give up the abuser is to give up the identity of the one who was abused. And if all you know is the one who was abused, in the context of the one who abused you, you might happily give up the abuser, but can you give up yourself, your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and touch the vulnerability of the unknown, the profundity of chaos of the feminine, in the trust that something in that unknown will coalesce that is more constructive, has more well-being than the past. When the past has consisted of one shocking trauma after another, how can you give up control when every time that has happened it has been followed by a calamity, by a hammer of shock and terror that is no more predictable than the last? One will cling to known suffering rather than face the unknown terror of projected trauma in a traumatic culture. How do we move from the known into the unknown to find a new vehicle so that we can continue the journey? And how can we forgive and let go of the tree when it is still blocking us? How can we forgive the neighbors who stand by as we vegetate in the crumpled vehicle, in the shattered identity? In a materialistic, psychologically illiterate culture, as long as the outer body is fine, as long as it's only a calamity of shattered identity, it's fine. You can rot in dissociative fixation and overwhelming trauma for the rest of your life. Because a traumatically illiterate culture cannot diagnose the symptoms of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Cannot diagnose the symptoms of dissociation, the symptoms of addiction and fixation, the correlation with addiction and trauma. A traumatically, psychologically illiterate culture is blind to the accident in front of them. And how can you forgive yourself for being in a collision when you cannot move through it? How can you forgive the tree for causing the collision when you cannot move beyond it? How can you accept something that is too big for you to transcend? And if you cannot accept yourself, you cannot accept the tree. And if you cannot accept the tree, you cannot accept the one who felled the tree, who didn't do the proper wind sail pruning, who shaved away the root expediently to make a few extra bucks. You cannot forgive the expediency. And if you cannot forgive the tree, you cannot forgive the life that gave birth to the tree. If you cannot forgive the tree, you cannot forgive the air that grew the tree. Now, our chauvinism is so thick that the ecological thinking of connectivity may be dim, but at some level we understand. Beyond chauvinism, that tree required universal participation to exist, which means that its falling requires universal participation. The universe produces, amongst all the billions of life-conducive planets, some planets with trees. And amongst all the billions and billions of trees, some are falling all the time. And the universe is okay with that. But I'm not. The universe produces wind. That wind is going to blow clean air in. It's going to blow soot air in. The very soot that's being blown out of your neighborhood so that clean air can come in is blowing over into another area. It's the same wind. The same wind that helps you win a race in a sailing competition is the same wind that blew that tree down, that caused a shipwreck out at sea, that led to the beginning of a tornado. It's the same wind. If you delete the wind, there is no tree that fell over. There is no tornado. There is no clean air. There is no sooty air. There is no rainfall from the clouds that blew in. You see, all life is connected. So for one part of it to stop and be banished, no more wind, no more trees falling, the entire universe has to stop. This tree cannot fall over, meaning I have to remove its possibility of falling. It cannot be done without stopping the entire fabric, the entire mathematical equation, the entirety of all existence for all time. Why? Because it exists as one portion of the possibility field. And a possibility field is all or nothing. A probability field, when you have two blocks, you have a probability that they can be combined with another two blocks that make 4 blocks. If you want to make sure that that can never happen, you've got to destroy one of the blocks. The mathematical equation that says that all things are possible cannot exist if one thing is not possible. It's not a possibility field. And if you have no possibility field, you have no probability field to coalesce out of it. And then you have no actuality to coalesce out of that. If you banish a single possibility, I want to live in a world where rape cannot happen, where trees cannot fall when I'm on the way to my important job interview. They just cannot. All life, the entire possibility field collapses. Now, a mathematician can carefully connect the dots. A dogmatic culturalist cannot. A dogmatic culturalist likes to think I can have a sunny day and it will have no impact anywhere in the world. I want it to be daylight for 24 hours. But I don't want to I'm not trying to make it dark for 24 hours somewhere else on the planet. I just want it to be daylight for 24 hours here. Yeah, but it doesn't actually work that way. When the Earth pivots around and stays stuck, do you want gravity to stop? How many nuclear bombs do you want to spend stopping the Earth at this one point? With an endless amount of sun, now that you've stopped it, how are you going to start it again? I don't want to think about any of that. That's ecological. That's mathematical. I just want what I want without any consequences. And this is, of course, the child. I want what I want without any consequence. I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to see that I live in an ecology. That for this to stop, then that stops. That if it is impossible for me to ever be harmed, it's also impossible for me to be loved. Because what I'm saying is I want total control over every human being, every person, everything on the entire planet, including God, including Goddess. None of you can do anything without my permission. So now if you love me, it's because I controlled you. I pulled the string. If I hurt you, I pulled the string. Well, that feels a little empty. You never felt like doing it on your own. But you can love me, but you can't hurt me. Yeah, that's not how the lever works. You can't change the gravitational constant on planet Earth and not change it in the entirety of the universe that is woven with that gravitational constant. So what I'm saying is, if there is one thing you cannot forgive, that is categorically unforgivable, and there are many. At some level, life is unforgivable. At some level, the universe is unforgivable. And you are a part of that, which means at some level you are unforgivable. So the real crisis is, can I love and accept all of me? And we do not. I won't say we cannot, but certainly we do not. And perhaps we cannot. We can accept this bit, this bit, this bit, but not this bit. But how do you rationalize the fact that you can accept the left tire and the left tire, but not the right tire on your vehicle, when the car cannot move without both? How can you rationalize the acceptance of your kindness and yes, when without your no, you could not say yes? In order to say, I will invest $100,000 with you, that $100,000 is off the table now. That means you didn't get it, you didn't get it, no one else in the entire universe got it so that I could do it to you. So if I like my yes, but hate my no, I'm a fool, because they don't exist without the other. If I like the light, but hate the darkness that brings it into attention, I don't know what I'm talking about. You see, and that's part of the problem with being dogmatic fools, which is part of the problem of being born into a cult of culture that does not coagulate around science, but around dogma, superstition, and tradition. That is sheer mathematical insanity. We take the circle that is one, an integrated ecological framework, an integrated ecological system, and we cut it in half. In our minds, we cannot cut it in half literally, because if you cut the earth in half, it no longer functions as in ecology. The gravitational spinning cycle is thrown off. There's no symmetry at a certain point when it's dissociative. The water that's flowing from one bit, the ocean that's going around, where does it go when you cut the earth in half? Does the ocean leak out into space? Because it keeps flowing from left to right, but with the tide, with the moon, but there's nowhere for it to flow to. Does it start drifting off because now the earth is half its size, it has half its gravitational pull? Do we fall off of one bit of the earth and get whacked as the other bit is spinning at a new odd orbit? What do we do when half of the earth bangs into another half of the earth when they're both... You cannot split the earth in half and just say, I'll just live on this half and get rid of the bad half. How about a person? Try cutting your body in half. I'm the right side and the left side. Oh, we don't want anything to do with that. What do you do with the blood that's pouring out? It needs that other side to receive it. So we cut the ecological whole in half with the polarity of our minds. The garden of good and evil. It's the descent into the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge, the delusion of polarity. The delusion that this is good and this is bad, innately. That this is better than this. That up is better than down. Without understanding, you cannot have up without down. You cannot have right without left. You cannot have warmth without cold. You cannot have warmth without hot. However you break it down, it is an ecology. It is a circle. If you set off east in a jet and fly for 30 hours, you will find yourself arriving back at the destination you left from the west. You set off east, but you arrive from the west. Why? There are no straight lines. Reality is circular. If you're truly selfish, you become the selfless saint. If you're truly selfless, you become the most selfish person around because they're one and the same. The most selfish person that ever lived wants everyone around them to be happy, everything to be the most beautiful thing imaginable, wants to be in tip-top physical shape, wants to be a most phenomenal lover, wants to be rich, wants to have every opportunity available to them. The most selfless person imaginable wants to give of themselves, so they have to develop themselves. It doesn't matter which line you head off in if you are true, if you follow. You see, because it's not selfish to live a mediocre life of bitterness and manipulation. That's mediocre and manipulative. It's not fun. It's not selfish. How about living in ecstatic, generous, grandiose states of abundance and power where you give and add to beauty and explore your creativity and everyone marvels at the magnificence of the world you're creating? Isn't that a little bit more fun than clawing and envy? In other words, it's not selfish. It's self-destructive to live a mediocre life. It's not selfless to be a boring, undeveloped, poor person who cannot contribute anything. That's not selfless. It's incredibly selfish. I couldn't be bothered to be wealthy and give of my wealth. I couldn't be bothered. I'm so humble. I'm just poor little useless me. Nothing selfless about it. It's incredibly self-destructive and destructive to others. What destroys the self destroys other people. So when we're talking about forgiveness and what is and is not forgivable, if the pedophile is not forgivable, then are the parents who raped him psychologically or physically? Gary Slutkin shows that violence is a disease, that the best way to predict where the next eruption of violence, where the next infection of violence it will express itself, will occur, is where the last one did. Just like all epidemics, the best way to tell where the next case of the flu will be is where the last case was. The best way to tell where the next case of AIDS will be is where the last partner was who had AIDS. You catch it from someone. Sociopathic pedophilia, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's heritable. Certain environments traumatize people to a point where they lose all empathy for other people and become reptilian. So if you hate the person who is sociopathic, how much more must you hate if you're intelligent? The cult that traumatized that individual to such an extent that they dissociated from their own empathic brain to manage the pain. Now, if you're too stupid to be angry at the sociopathic environment that produced the sociopathic person that you hate and cannot forgive, you may maintain the ignorance-based delusion that you hate the sociopath but accept the garden that grew that sociopath. If you have a garden that keeps growing endless weeds and you hate the weeds, but think the garden is perfect, that keeps growing more weeds than you can weed, you are a fool. You don't understand gardening. Based on that foolishness, you may say, this is a wonderful garden, but I hate these weeds. If you are intelligent, you say, this is a garden that produces more weeds than I can pick. And we'll keep doing that until I find a new relationship with this garden. In other words, if you hate the weed, the intelligent person hates the garden that produces an endless stream of weeds. And if you hate the garden that produces an endless stream of weeds, you have to hate the ecology that produce that garden, or the people that designed it. And if you hate the stupidity of the people who designed a garden that produces an endless amount of weeds, then you have to hate the culture that produces an endless amount of stupidity in its people. And if you hate the culture that produces an endless stream of stupid people, you have to hate the ecology that has produced 10,000 cults or cultures and counting. And if you hate the culture that has produced 10,000 cultures and counting, most of them are extinct, just like most of the species on the planet are now extinct, then you have to hate nature for producing people, because people are the ones who keep producing these absurd cultures. If you hate nature for producing people, you have to hate the planet that gave birth to nature that's producing millions upon millions of species, some of which you say are good and some of which you say are bad. And if you hate the planet that produced all these people and produced nature as an ecology, then you have to hate the universe, who amongst all the billions of life-potentiated planets gave birth to this one in its probability field. And at the end of it, you end up with God, with Goddess, with all that is. How could you be so dumb? You produced all this life, all this stuff. Didn't you know that amongst all the planets there would be this one, and amongst all the species there would be this one, and they would just keep hurting each other for thousands of years after thousands of years, till finally my parents came along and raped my sister. And didn't you understand this was going to happen? You stupid son of a bitch. You loathsome. Were you so dumb that you didn't see this coming? It's an argument with God, Goddess, all that is. The only trouble is we are, of course, a part of it. If I cannot accept God, Goddess, all that is, it's because I cannot accept myself. God, Goddess, all that is can accept us. But if we cannot accept us, we cannot accept God, Goddess, all that is, because we are a part of it, and we are the part that we do not accept. Or our uncle is a part, but we are a part of that. You see, there's nothing that can truly be separated. We pretend it with language. We play little games. This is a table, this is a chair. This table has nothing to do with the chair. They both have matter. They both exist in space. They're both bound by gravity. They both catch fire. They both have mass. They're both built. There's endless connections. The only thing that separates them is sound games. I call this a sound like this, table. I call this another sound, chair. What connects that? The voice, sound waves, energy. It's complete delusion to come up with these fantasies of distinctions. So we move around as a mass of energy in an identity, in a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. This pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being can digest some energies and cannot digest others at this moment in time. When the calamity of our identity encounters a pattern of energy that it cannot digest, we are stuck. We are traumatized. We dissociate. We become arrested. Our journey stops until we receive help, until we learn to transcend identity and continue our journey, until we can accept and forgive the one who is stuck, the one who is helpless, the one who didn't help us, the one who set us up to fail, the one who sabotaged the brakes, who cut the tree. We hang on to that pattern of energy. And in doing so, hang on to the identity that is associated with that pattern of energy. If we cannot accept that energy and cannot accept the energy of the perpetrator, we cannot shift vehicles into a different identity. And we cannot continue the journey. When we cannot continue the journey, we are stuck. there's frustration, there's helplessness, there's pain. When there's stuckness and frustration and helplessness and pain, we blame the perpetrator. See, you dropped the tree. If you hadn't done this, if you hadn't raped my sister, she wouldn't have had to go on to drink. If she hadn't gone to drink, she wouldn't have gotten a car accident. If she hadn't gotten a car accident, she wouldn't be in jail. If she hadn't been in jail, she wouldn't have been raped again. You did this, and I'm not moving until you see what you did and make it right. And I cannot go forward because I'm the warden. I'm the one that guards the prison. I cannot accept this feeling. I cannot accept this sensation. It's too big. So I cannot accept the world. So I cannot accept myself. So I cannot accept the one I blame, whether it's God, self, you, the cult. It's the same. If God is all that is, we're a piece of that. If God is not all that is, then all that is bigger than God. Who needs? What's the big deal about God? There's plenty of things that are bigger than other things. But if God is not bigger than all that is, then set theory suggests God didn't create all that is. A baby doesn't give birth to a mother. The bigger one gives birth to a smaller one. If God is smaller than all that is, they cannot create all that is. And if God is bigger than all that is, and all that is includes you, and you will not accept or love or forgive yourself, then you will not accept and love and forgive God. Because you're part of all that is. And all that is was created by God. And you're saying, no, God, you made a mistake. I don't belong here. God, you may thought the possibility field should include all things. I beg to differ. You may think in your infinite wisdom that I have a role to play, but God, you made a mistake, you dumb fuck. I don't belong here. I'm bad. You're an idiot. I'm smarter than you, God. Because I know that I'm unlovable. You just haven't figured it out yet. You're too dumb. Wait, I'll give lessons. I'll point out my flaws. You'll get there, God, one of these days. Goodness gracious, having to teach God how dumb I am. My goodness. How did you manage to create it all? You don't even know what I know. My mom knew more than you do. You dumb fuck. Listen to her. She said I was this and this and this and this and how I'd never amount to anything and this and this and this. You weren't paying attention to that? You think you know more than my mom? Oh, my goodness. So, ecologically, you see, a car doesn't run without brake fluid. You taste a bit of brake fluid, it tastes foul. Get rid of it. If you get rid of the brake fluid, the brakes run hot. The car doesn't stop. The engine, the gasoline, the electricity, it's unpleasant. Get rid of it. You see, but ecological thinking is about understanding that everything has its place, just from the right point of view. But the cultured brain, the cult mind, looks out and says, I don't agree with that. That's a bunch of bullshit. This should be happening like this. Why is it happening like that? It should be happening like this. 20 billion years of Earth evolution? She doesn't know it. She doesn't know shit. Doesn't she realize I'm right? She's wrong. 20 billion years of success. 20 billion years of creativity. Sustainability. Of new life coming out of nothing. The entire universe coming out of less than a pea. That's her work. Took her 20 billion years to create the multiverse. But she got it wrong. Listen to me. I've been ruining and fucking things up for the last 50 years. Listen to the expert. So there's a conundrum here. We can't accept it all. So we can't digest it all. So we cannot release it all. We can't own it all, so we cannot respond to it all, so we cannot change it all. We cannot forgive everything. And yet, everything is interconnected, ecologically connected. Despite the BS of little mouth noises called language that tries to break the one, the garden, the whole, into an infinite number of parts. Despite that, despite the sword of polarity, the knowledge of good and evil and the descent into the wasteland, in which half of all that we are and all that is and all that God is bad, and half of all that we are and all that is and all that God is and all that Goddess is good. And then the endless battle to prove that they're not connected in some way. The hero is good, but the villain is bad. Well, how do you rescue the damsel from the villain? I.e., how do you play the hero without the villain? You don't get one without the other. The cops are good, the thieves are bad. Who do you arrest? I mean, the cops are rendered a laughingstock if there are no criminals. If they just go around wasting taxpayer money, bothering innocent people doing their work, how are they good? They're good because of the villains. The villains are bad because of the cops. If you're going to blame someone, if you desperately need to blame someone, how can you do it if there's no one to blame? It's very difficult to scientifically prove that the whole is a series of dissociative parts when all of the data leads to the interconnectedness of all. It's just very difficult. Very difficult to say that this finger is separate from Mars, when so many constants and laws of physics connect every particle of matter with every other particle of matter. Very difficult to say that thoughts are better than feelings, or feelings are better than thoughts, or bodies are better than feelings, or men are better than women. You can't make the case. We cannot accept everything. And yet what we cannot accept is linked with what we can. What we can accept cannot exist without what we cannot accept. The East cannot exist without the West. The up cannot exist without the down. The black cannot exist without the white. The riches cannot exist without the poverty. The good cannot exist without the bad. The hero cannot exist without the villain. So how can the hero be good and the villain be bad if neither exists without the other? Well, who said the human mind is capable of answering these questions? A mind that is founded on language, a mind that cannot think or think a single thought without words, a mind whose consciousness is formulated around words and the thoughts that come out of them and the thoughts that shape the words. Words are distinct patterns of energy. Through the lens of words, it appears that we are in a world of distinction and polarity. But if you take away the words, if you take away the thoughts, if you take away the consciousness of good and evil, what you see is an ecological whole. You see a great dance of billions of planets capable of our form of life. We see a great dance of millions upon millions of species, new species being born and new species and old species dying. We see on this planet alone more than 10,000 cults or cultures in human history, each with their own language, most of which are extinct, more of which die every day. Of the 600 cultures hanging on for dear life, most of them, some are dying every month. Every year or so, a language dies out. Every year or so, new slang, new language is invented and put into the dictionary. It is an evolutionary journey of energy inside identity, inside patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, if you're a human being, inside vibrating and cohering, if you're one of the many other forms of energy in and around all that is. To have true freedom, we must transcend our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. This identity cannot digest everything. At some point, we have to let the identity go. At the end of a lifetime, at the end of a moment, at the end of a crisis, at the end of a trauma, and see what new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing awaits us. Lies in the closet of our probability field, of our possibility field, as new robes to don, as new patterns to form, that are capable, that are vehicles to take us the next step in the journey.